back.
The Mule says, "Welcome, Jamie. We will have you intro music next time." By the way, this is the Mule. He's going to help us pick games this year. So, hello, Phil. Hello, Jamie. the great one has joined us. I just gave you that nickname, man. Jamie Bradford from Jamie and Goldwater fame. Also an outstanding person and expert, and well, you name it. We're just glad to have Jamie on. He's here on the guest line, brought to you by McKellarEnterprises.org. Meredith Taylor going to teach you some golf lessons. Get that swing squared away with Meredith. You've heard how to contact her. Follow her on Twitter at MER Taylor. She's going to join us on Friday. Jamie, lots going on around Gamecock land and college football, but just in general, I know you keep your finger on the pulse of things and stuff. The word I get's excitement, looking forward to it, all that good stuff. How is your feel? Because I think people would be interested in that. I hadn't heard from you in a while. So,
first of all, it's good because I look over here and I see all these people that used to watch and listen to us, and I appreciate that. I don't know where the great one came from. That's ridiculous.
I came up with that. Came up with that too, like 5 minutes ago.
Okay. Well, we certainly appreciate that, and it's good to be able to kind of dabble back into it a little bit with you. And I know you and I have talked a lot off air. We talk all the time, so I'm going to be doing some stuff with Bill Gunner and 107.5 The Game here starting in the next week or two. So I'm still around, still kind of in the thick of it with a bunch of folks up there, and so my feel actually right now is pretty good. When you kind of start to look at I always look at the players. I mean, that's where it should start, right? Is with the players. Like, do you have good players or not, or do you not have good players? Mm-hmm. And South Carolina's got some pretty good players. On defense, you got 2 5-stars up there, and on the defensive line, you got a potential All-American behind them in the secondary, and Cam Smith. You got Spencer Rattler at quarterback. You got Marshawn Lloyd at running back, and other guys. You got a bunch of wide receivers you're excited about. You return an offensive line that's 8 or 9 deep. I mean, we could keep going here. And, so I think for the first time in a long time, they've got a bunch of really good players. And this is going to sound strange, but because the season was somewhat of a letdown, even though they had some big wins, but I probably haven't seen this much excitement going into a season since 2014. Now, Texas A&M promptly came into Williams-Brice and ended all those hopes and dreams real quick. But going into the year, everybody was pretty fired up because of what had happened the 3 previous seasons. So it's been a while, but so far so good, and hopefully they stay healthy over the next few weeks.
Yeah, it's been a good offseason. I mean, not just from, when you look at the players and all that good stuff, but recruiting's going really well. By the way, Xavier McLeod, I'll just go ahead and say it because we don't get to it, announcing Saturday, I still like the Gamecocks' chances, defensive tackle from Camden. Yeah. Gamecocks could add Vakari Swain here pretty soon too, and maybe some others. But anyway, I look at it and I'm like, I'm a little surprised that and I guess it's just because there's so many teams with like that you want to believe in this year, but you don't. And even Georgia, to me, Jamie, is like, okay, yes, I know they're immensely talented. Yes, I would pick them to win the SEC East. But look at what they lost, and this is not Nick Saban at Alabama. This is they're not there. I mean, even though they won, they're not there yet. They haven't stacked. I mean, even Bama in 2010, that team the Gamecocks beat, they lost 3 games that year because they lost a lot off their team from last year. So, I wonder why people don't kind of look more closely at the Gamecocks, but I guess I kind of understand it. And to me, Jamie, and let's see what you think about this, it's probably better because that 2014 team was ultra hyped. They did a Steve Spurrier, Kenny Chesney movie that offseason, dude. I mean, it was amazing. It was going to shoot. Coach Ward says our defense is going to be better this year. Yeah. Steve Mule says that's a pile of. Stop embarrassing me. But yeah, so what do you? I almost think it's better to kind of be under the radar right now.
Well, I think it's better for South Carolina to be under the radar right now. I mean, look, the difference is those teams that you mentioned, Georgia and Alabama in particular, and then the rest of the powers in the SEC, when they have really good seasons, even if there's conversation amongst the national pundits that maybe they're not going to be as good, they're still expected to be able to replace those type players because historically that's what they've done. But that's not what's happened historically at places like South Carolina and Kentucky and Ole Miss and Mississippi State and quote unquote the blue collar programs in this league that will flash and then they kind of will die out here and there, right? So, it's to your own. I don't want to say it's your own fault, but it's your own history. I mean, South Carolina's never really sustained anything, outside of a few spurts here and there, and so they don't ever really get a lot of recognition until they go out there and actually prove it. I mean, was it last Friday that 12? They were basically picked by all the coaches to be the 12th best team in the SEC based on votes received. I mean, I don't really think that's going to happen. I think that they're going to be much better than that. But, if Shane Beamer plays his cards right, and he's not much like Coach Sweeney in this instance, but this would be somewhere where he needs to do it. That's a little bit of a shot at you, man. That's kind of some disrespect. Like, hey, the coaches, the guys that run the programs in this sport, your peers, they think you suck. The only two teams that are picked behind you are Missouri and Vanderbilt. Let that sink in real quick. So you're going to have a JC. We say this every year. We said it last year, and we said it the year before, and we said it the year before. And this year, if you want to take the next step, it's as important as ever. You got to beat somebody you're not supposed to beat. And last year, they beat Auburn and they beat Florida, and they weren't supposed to beat either one of them. And then they were totally written off in the bowl game, and they beat the crap out of North Carolina. So they did that 3 times to get to 7 wins. And you're more than likely going to have to do that at least 3 times this year if you want to improve on those 7.
I agree, definitely. And this is our poll question, because Brad Crawford, he believes, we had him on yesterday, he thinks it's more likely that they upset Georgia than winning in Arkansas. Nobody's buying it. We have this poll in the Big Spur and also on Twitter. 84% say the more likely wins at Arkansas compared to 15 for Georgia. The Twitter numbers are the same.
Yeah.
I think you need to take it one game at a time. And if you're good enough to go on the road and beat Arkansas in week 2, I think you're good enough to hang with Georgia. And I think some people are like, oh, you're crazy, man. But, I hate it because I talked about my Georgia friends earlier, and they're like, you're always trying to have some reason why we're not Alabama. And I'm like, because you're not, But they could be. If they have another great year this year and go to the playoff, they're well on their way. But I'm just, that's just so much talent off that defense. So much talent. And if you get both of those, JB, you're 5-0 going to Lexington. So,
Well, look, I think I actually agree with Brad. I think it is Georgia. And the reason that I say that is because I mentioned earlier, prove it. Well, Carolina has not proven anything on the road at all since they beat Georgia there in 2019. And that was if you really look back at what happened in 2019 and 2020, I don't ever really want to call anything a fluke, but damn, that's pretty close. I mean, it was just a strange day, and it happened to work out for South Carolina. As Coach Spurrier used to say, well, sometimes God's smiling on the Gamecocks. Well, he had a pretty big grin that day, that's for sure. I mean, but since then, they essentially on the road, they've done nothing. I mean, they've done nothing. They've gotten off to terrible starts. Or they've gotten into terrible lulls. Last year was embarrassing everywhere they went, including Missouri, even though they kind of fought back towards the end and they hung in there in the first quarter, and then it just kind of fell apart. You can't have that at Arkansas. You will get beat there. And last year, Arkansas didn't lose a game at home. I think they're 8-3 in Fayetteville or at home in the last 2 years combined. 2 of those losses, by the way, are against teams named Georgia and Alabama. Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, that's a big time prove it thing, but they have proven it in Williams-Brice Stadium against Georgia time and time again. They've done it a lot in the last 20 years, and they can do it. And it's a noon kick, and I think that works out. So, but I'm with you. I mean, as much as fun as it is to do it here on August the 10th, we'll worry about Georgia starting about September the 11th after they get through that Arkansas game.
Yeah, that's we had to. It was the audio was not all that great, so we didn't hear exactly what he said. But I feel like I feel like he thinks Georgia State's going to win the football game, which I don't agree. Shut up, man. Anyway, we had Ben Moore from PantherTalk.com, the Georgia State Big Spur version of the Big Spur.
Yeah.
And he thinks they're going to win, but you look at their personnel, Jamie, and really the first 3 games. I keep rolling this out. Yeah. All big time rushing attacks. All big time. Georgia State was top 10. Arkansas was top 10. Georgia's Georgia. They were top 30 last year. All different, distinct styles of rushing attacks. It's a little scary, when you think about the run defense from last year. So I'm concerned about Georgia State. I want to get your take on that. Your take on that game. It's a night game. It should be great, but should be a game the Gamecocks win. But I have a feeling that's going to be a challenging matchup right out the gate. And when I say challenging, it's going to be a game the Gamecocks have to play well. If they play well, I think they'll win and probably win easily. But they can't stump their toe in that one.
Well, I mean, what was the formula for the Gamecock defense last year?
Turnovers.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that's where it starts and where it ends. You get turnovers, they're gonna have a chance. JC, if this offense isn't better than last year, there's a major issue, and it's not the personnel. But I think from what I've heard, it is better, and they are clicking, and they look good, and that starts at quarterback. I'm sure we'll get there in just a little bit, but I'm with you on that. I like Georgia State. Love Sean Elliott. It's impossible to not love Sean Elliott. He is an outstanding human being. He's a hell of a football coach. He is probably would never admit it publicly, but JC, you and I aren't stupid. He is a closet Gamecock fan, but every fiber of his body wants to win this game. And he's got a lot of the right pedigree to be able to design a really good rushing attack. We all know that. He's good at that. He can find that. But again, this is about South Carolina. All right, let's put it this way. Phil, JC, Phil the Groundhog. I've been wanting to say that all day. All right. So
Tony Phil.
So look, if you had Georgia, no, let's leave them out of this. Let's put another up-and-coming team that's gotten a lot of respect in the last couple of years, trendy-type programs who media guys look at and they say, oh, yeah, they're going to be really good. Kentucky, Tennessee, Ole Miss, Arkansas, clearly A&M is there now. All right, let's just stay with those 5. If you didn't name another player on their defense, not one, but you said 2 of the starting 4 up front are former top 10 players in the country, 2 of the top 4 highest signed players in the history of the program. Another kid led the nation in sacks 2 years ago, and one of their secondary members is a preseason All-American. What do you think everybody would be saying about that defense, regardless of who else is playing? Just those 4 guys. What do you think everybody else would be saying?
They'd be like, they'd be probably drooling. Picking them second. Yeah.
They'd be drooling if Kentucky had 2 5-stars up front starting named Jordan Birch and Zach Pickens and another guy named Jordan Strawn and another guy named Cam Smith. They would be drooling over that, but they ain't drooling over South Carolina. So, again, that's what we started this segment with. It goes back to the players. If you've got good players, you'll get people talking, and that's going to be their first opportunity to do it at 7:30 Saturday night at Williams-Brice.
I know. It's one of those things where you just look at it and, I mean, look, man, I am glad that there's Georgia State fans for Sean Elliott's standpoint. I'm glad that and Ben Moore certainly does a great job for them.
He's the best program in Atlanta right now.
Yeah. Well, they're better than Georgia Tech, I'll tell you that. But that's ugly down there. But
I know Sean Elliott after the year might have an offer just to drive about 3 miles down the street and coach.
Shoot, I'd hire him tomorrow if I were Tech. I'd get that other guy. I never thought Collins was a good hire, but anyway, we'll talk about that later. But so Rattler was reading up today on Outkick. David Troy, who does a little gambling type odds, what was a good bet on the Heisman odds preseason, what was a bad one. He thought Rattler would be a bad one, but he's like, look, if he puts South Carolina in contention, he's going to be in contention for the Heisman. And which sounds, I mean, look, a Clemson fan that's sneakily listening to this show is probably going to clip this and say that I said Rattler's going to win the Heisman. However,
I finally blocked that guy.
Yeah. Oh, well, there's all those guys. There's a big anonymous Clemson. I think it's the same guy too. Anyway.
Yeah. I was like, I mean, it doesn't offend me in any way, shape, or form. You got to be like a pretty pathetic loser to spend that much time on social media focusing on your rival. But I was like, dude, I'm not I check Twitter now like twice a day, and when I check it, I'm not gonna see his crap anymore. So
yeah. So
occupying rent-free space in that guy's head. So
yeah, that guy's nuts, a nut job. Yeah. So anyway, gosh, I lost my train of thought here. Oh yeah, so Rattler and the Heisman, and he was talking about it. He's like, well, if he puts him in contention, he's gonna win the Heisman. I agree because he's a known name. South Carolina starts winning, like we talked about 5-0. If they happen to start 5-0. And 5-0 going to Lexington, which would be a huge game. And then if you beat them in Lexington, you're 6-0. You have a week off. A&M's coming to town. Game day would probably be there for that if A&M pulls its weight. But your expectations for him, I think some of the narrative around him's unfair. I think some of it is fair. Different style offense. But you hear things coming out of practice like he puts it on the money every single time.
Yeah, I've heard the same stuff, and I'm actually going to hop on a call a little bit later on today with somebody up there who's, let's just say, spent a lot of time around him, Spencer Rattler, and I've heard the same stuff. But as much as anything, JC, I had a source tell me last week. I'm not sure if in one of our late evening conversations if we've talked about this or not. I know Flint and I have. But one of the great things, which by the way, I think Michael was actually watching. He called me earlier and said, "I heard your dumbass is going on the Big Spur show today." I said, "Well, I'm dumbass number one until you come in, and then you'll take over that spot."
Yeah, we're gonna have Flint on. Yeah,
yeah. But what I've heard, JC, we know about his talent. Like if you think that you can discredit this young man's talent, you've never watched a snap of football in your life. We've seen it. We know he's talented. We're not stupid. Nobody's stupid. I think one of the questions is how will that talent parlay to South Carolina? Because I honestly, I believe had he transferred to like Tennessee, oh my God, you couldn't shut him up. I mean, it would be nonstop. But he's at South Carolina, and that's probably where some of the hesitation. And that's fine. I understand that. I'm not upset about that. But I think the main thing I've heard about Spencer Rattler is, this is going to sound strange, but you'll get it. Both of you. Everybody should get this. When he walks into the huddle, everybody's paying pretty close attention to what he's got to say. Like, they feel really good, as in that's my quarterback right there. And that's no disrespect to anybody else on the roster, because I know that Luke is beloved up there. I know those guys are excited about him getting his chance. He's going to play this year. We all know he's going to play this year. They got a bunch of young guys. Colton Gothier is still in the mix. I mean, they got a bunch of dudes, I think, that are really talented kids. But all of the dudes in that huddle watched this guy on TV as a Heisman Trophy candidate. They've all seen it. And so if he has a bad snap or something like that, there's no lost trust in his ability. It's like, that's Spencer. He'll get it right. As long as we do our thing, he's going to do his thing. So it's an instant gratification when he walks into the huddle and calls out that play. They know that what he's saying, they can trust it. And if they don't know what the hell he's talking about, because a lot of that happened last year, he's going to get it corrected for him. Or at least he'll call timeout and get it figured out. So the trust that I've heard, from what I've heard, is enormous right now.
And that's very important when you have a transfer quarterback that comes in. And, the things I've heard too, JB and Phil, are that he, it's Spencer Rattler. And then you get this feedback like, oh, he's a bad kid or not a good teammate. Or
remember what he said. He was 17 and all.
Yeah, all that crap. And what I was told when they recruited him, and look, give Shane Beamer credit. Shane's not going to bring in a guy. Shane Beamer is a protect the culture at all costs guy. He's not going to bring in a guy that's going to disrupt everything just because he's talented.
Well, and at the most important position in the program.
Yeah. It's like when Coach O, when he was at Ole Miss, brought in Brent Schaefer from Tennessee. Remember that, Brent Schaefer? Terrible for chemistry on that team. And that team didn't win a damn game in the SEC. So, you can mess it up bad. But what I was told was when they met with him, a source told me, a contact, JC, he's been served some humble pie. and he knows he has a lot to prove.
Mm-hmm.
And we wouldn't have taken him otherwise, is what I was told. So he spent a lot of time endearing himself not only to the community and the fans, but his teammates. I heard nothing but great things behind the scenes about him being a great teammate. And that's what you need out of that position, guys. I mean, that's the bottom line, not to mention he's talented. So you gotta kind of, like that about this team. All right. So Heath Fairclough, or Heath, I'm sorry. Throw that one up there. I want to let JB take a shot at this one. He has a question on the Nano Sports chat line. He says, y'all remember the year the D had lots of turnovers and beat Michigan in a bowl game with BMAC calling the plays and having high expectations the following year? Yes, I do remember that.
Yeah.
And he says, I see a lot of similarities. I will let JB take this one because I don't.
I don't see a lot of similarity. If he's Heath, if you're referencing the hype, yeah, there's similarity in hype. But if you're referencing football and the team itself, no, it's different. And JC, I think that as much credit as should be thrown at Coach Beamer, and he deserves it. We know that. But a lot of these guys that we're expecting to watch come out and do big things this year, especially on defense, those are Muschamp guys. And so I think that, like, if we could be mature and have a mature conversation about all of this, like, there is a collective at this point in time in the preseason pat on the back that should be going to Will Muschamp and his staff for bringing in some of these guys, to Shane Beamer and his staff for being able to develop and keep them in the program, as easy as it is to transfer, and to the young men for giving this new regime a chance. I mean, it's taken a collective effort to be able to have that feel to get where we are. But, I mean, if you go back to what 2018 was going to look like from a talent standpoint and what 2022 looks like from a talent standpoint, including all the guys that are here now that you can just snap your fingers and get in the portal, no, it's a lot different. And the head coach actually has the support of the fan base. Unfortunately, that was not the case even after winning 9 games back in 2017 for Coach Muschamp.
Yeah, and then, that Georgia game took the life out of that 2018 team for a while. You had a debacle at Kentucky. And look, and here's the difference, okay? That 2017 team lost Sky Moore, Dante Sawyer, who led the nation in forced fumbles, Taylor Stallworth, who I think we all can agree was one of the better D tackles Muschamp had. Some players out of the secondary that ended up leaving. And then that team in 2018 on defense got ravished by injuries. My mistake with that group was this. I knew they were going to be better on offense, and by God, they were. It was the best offense Will Muschamp ever had as a head coach, and probably the best offense since 2014 that we've seen at Carolina. Jake played well in a lot of games. You had Debo, that kind of thing. Right. Where I screwed that up, I was just like, well, Muschamp's first 2 years, his first year he pieced it together. The defense towards the end of that year kind of got exposed, but they were doing it with like bubble gum and masking tape on defense that first season and got to a bowl. And then you had this big turnover, forcing turnover machine the next year. And I thought, well, even if they're not as good on defense, they'll at least be decent. I didn't expect a historically bad type of situation.
Well, you had a lot of injuries that year too.
And then the injuries killed it. So that's where I made that mistake that year in kind of thinking, well, they'll take the next step, because I was like, well, you got – and I think that's kind of, one thing to look out for this year, because I started thinking that. I was like, well, there's all this talk about the offense. What about the Gamecocks defense? Or are we setting ourselves up for a letdown? And but then I looked at the personnel, and I was like, nah, you're not.
On the other side of that, JC, too, is like, we all know Muschamp could recruit, right? I mean, nobody's questioning that, but you're putting players in the league, even from South Carolina, but it's a developmental thing with him. Like, we could never see that whole package just gel and come together. And that really, for me, is what my eyes are on with Beamer this year, because we got the pieces, you've got the depth, the talent's there. Now we got to put it all together as a cohesive unit, which is something I think was lacking in the Muschamp years.
Well, and that 2018 season as well, like, I know, JC, you mentioned Georgia, you mentioned Kentucky, but in addition to the injuries that year, guys, and there was look, if you have that many injuries on this team, you're probably going to have similar results. But like where I think the Muschamp era began to really truly die was Florida, because they were winning that game 31-14 and they blew it. They blew it. I mean, Florida didn't really come back and win the game. I mean, I'm always a give credit guy. Y'all know that. You've been around me a long time. Nah, man. South Carolina blew the game in this. Had they won that game, different season. But they lost, and then from there on out, they just could not figure it out. It was bad.
Yeah, I mean, you had that the moral victory up at Clemson or whatever, and that game
victory, giving up 60 points.
That game was a 28-point game in the fourth quarter.
Hey, back then I agreed with Clemson fans who were laughing at us, who were like, y'all are excited because you scored 35 and lost by 21. You got to be kidding me. I agree with him. Like, yeah, there was sure, our offense finally showed up. We scored 35 points. That was neat. But we got beat by 3 touchdowns at our rival. Like, there was nothing moral about that.
It was
embarrassing.
It was good to be for them to be competitive for a half, and then but that was what it was. It's 28-21 at halftime. Next thing you know, Clemson's up by 4 touchdowns in the fourth quarter. So that's crazy. Well, JB, this is the first, hopefully, of many conversations that we have here.
You have my number.
Yeah, this is really good. Yeah, I got it locked and loaded. But thanks for
hey, what about the intro music? What are we doing about this? We got to figure out intro music.
Me and Phil have been talking about
I almost sang some Eric Church for you.
Oh. Hey, I tried to do Sinners Like Me at karaoke last night. It went horribly wrong.
Oh boy.
Nat's got the video. I came back and killed it with Purple Rain at the end, but
do you want me to bring Eric to your wedding, or I've got an in with him. I can get him there.
Yeah, if he'll sit up there and play on the porch, that'd be great.
They're taking a lot of the year off with touring, so he might be tight financially, but he can crash at my crib. I'll bring him.
All right, cool, man. That's awesome. So bring the chief on in. All right, so we'll have some bumper music for you next time, buddy. Thanks.
All right, guys. Take care.
Thanks,
see you.
Thanks,
everybody. Good to see everyone. Thank you.
Yeah, good to see everybody.